I have been a transformational leader, which happened accidentally, but I kept going and ended up finding out I am a transformational leader for over 2 decades. And the last 2 decades have specifically been in healthcare, but my overall career spans across 28 years. And my doctoral research actually was very much specific to the conversation we will have today, which was really understanding how emotional intelligence of leaders has a reciprocal interdependency with staff's work engagement during times of extreme transformational change. So, since the time I did my doctoral research, I have continued to lead transformations in organization and have had a lot of understanding of how the emotional intelligence concept comes to play during times of transformation in the interplay of like, the dynamic, that's between those that are being led and those who are leading and the outcomes that you are hoping to get from a transformational effort. And that's the reason I talk about reciprocation.
You remind me of I worked with a company that had about 18,000 employees, and we were talking about transformational change. That's why they brought me in, much like they would bring you in, to understand it. And I saw a butterfly on her back wall, this big image of a butterfly, much like that beautiful art you have behind you. And at the time, I was raising monarch butterflies here in Santa Barbara. And if you've ever been, we know what happens with butterflies. They transform from a caterpillar into this beautiful butterfly. But I don't know how many people have actually seen that happen, where a chrysalis is formed and it goes about 2 weeks. But then what happens in the 2 hours that it turns into a butterfly, the chrysalis shakes and it has this violent, I call it a transformation, but it's this violent event. Then it breaks open and then it's this beautiful butterfly. And I said to her, I said, what's going to need to happen is you're going to have to shake everything up around here before you can transform into this company that you have an envision for. And I'm curious, when I say that, is that analogous to the way you think about transformation?
That's not just how I think about transformation. That's how I have lived through transformations for everything that I have done so far. Transformation is a big word. It's an overhaul, right? You're
Yes.
basically there's change, and then there's transformation. And many times we use the two terms interchangeably, but they are different. Change is happening in small, every little thing that we do in our life. My life is changing, the world is changing. When you're talking about transformation, whether it's planned or unplanned, it really is transformation. It's not transformation until it shakes you up, right? So in my journey, the different kinds of transformations have involved either, designing something from scratch, again, in a transformational manner, because what you're designing is basically not aligned to the behaviors or the perceptions or how the organization has run in the past. So you're bringing very new ideas, right? And it's kind of making people get out of their comfort zone and starting to think, right? Not they haven't thought that way about certain things you're bringing forward. So that's shaking them up. Even if you're not disrupting something that existed and renewing it, even designing and building can shake people up. And then there certainly is transformation where you come in and you challenge the status quo, right? And you're trying to get people on board in regards to doing things differently. And the challenge in organizations with transformation, and we can even take that to a larger extent of in societies, in our personal lives, when transformations come our way. The biggest challenge is you have to get out of your comfort zone and you have to learn new behaviors. It's about learning new behaviors. You cannot do new things until there is an unlearning. And that unlearning is what makes you nervous. It creates the fear, it creates the anxiety. You don't know if what you're undertaking is going to get you to a better
Mm.
place. It's really a matter of trust, with the leader coming in and trying to shake you up because you haven't seen what you haven't seen. So it's exactly, you've just given a very beautiful explanation of, the butterfly analogy is truly what going through a transformation means. But again, what I would say is you have to remember is how beautiful it is once it's out and it has its wings and it's flying.
The caterpillars are beautiful as well. You talk about the importance of emotional intelligence, and people who know about it call it EQ. Um, it's been my experience in talking with leaders that they may have heard it sometime on a podcast or something, but they don't really know it, nor have they tested their EQ, or even understood how important understanding what your EQ is. I think it's probably more than your IQ, in my opinion. Um, why don't you explain to the audience what emotional intelligence is? Because I don't want to assume that people even know, because it's so critical to your work.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that question forward. You are very right. In fact, that is one thing that I emphasize when I talk about transformational change and emotional intelligence is in organizations, especially I'm a big proponent of bringing the concept of emotional intelligence to organizations if you really want to
Right.
transform the right way. And going back to the relationship element, emotional intelligence, it's basically a scientifically studied
Yeah.
concept, right? EQ is the measurement, it's emotional quotient, and EI is basically the construct, the whole concept, right? Emotional intelligence, and you measure it through EQ. And it was originally proposed by Dr. Daniel Goleman, who's the father of emotional intelligence, and he brought forward the concept that in making any optimal decisions, again, I'm using the term optimal decisions, right? The factors that play into that, if they're only driven by what your brain thinks, your thinking, and they are not considerate of the human side, which is actually the emotional side, right? Because humans are all head to toe, we are full of emotions, and
Yeah.
most of the responses, most of the things that we say, the way we will understand the situation, comprehend a situation that comes our way, it's all driven by how we feel about that situation, right? So the concept of emotional intelligence is really smart decisions, intelligent decisions are driven by a balance of thinking and feeling before acting. So it's your brain plus your heart.
Mm.
It leads to action, and that's an emotionally intelligent outcome, right? And so it's not just about don't have emotions, right? Or right, control your emotions. That's not what it is. It is really thinking about your emotions, understanding your emotions, navigating your emotions, and having them be part of your decision making as much as your brain is part of the decision making. So
So
that's the whole
I
concept.
have a quick
Yeah.
question for you, because it got me thinking about, in as you think about it, the intentionality around my emotions, but it's also as a leader, how what I'm saying is impacting the emotions of the people I'm leading or the people that I'm speaking to.
Right.
And as a storyteller and as a fan of storytelling, which is what I love so much about TED, is I think in business, we don't put as much weight on the emotional impact of storytelling and the importance of that on creating this more human kind of conversation inside the organization. We feel that it needs to be sterile. Do you get that same sense?
Well, that is, you've just completed the overall definition and explanation of what EQ is. It's awareness of yourself, right? And
Yeah.
awareness of emotions of others.
Yeah.
So those are the two components, right?
Mm.
Because anything that you say, do, or bring forward is going to have an impact on others. And if you're not doing it in a manner where you are cognizant of what it's going to result into in form of a reaction, right? Then your decision or your approach really may not be leading you jointly to an optimal outcome. So the primary components actually of the emotional intelligent construct is awareness of your own self, awareness of others, motivation, which is again, I always say your motivation should be very clear in regards to giving you the right thinking and having you navigate your feelings to where you're headed. And then again, a huge component of the EQ construct is also social intelligence, relationship building, and then of course comes the empathy part, and there are a lot of different things as we evolve and expand on the concept of emotional intelligence.
When you're meeting, because you work with C-level, that's where you live. You have to start at the top. I mean, in my opinion, you have to start at the top. Or you're working with founders and in something that has yet to grow. Do you find some pushback on this notion on what you're trying to explain to them that they have to when I think touchy feely, but it's not. Someone with my East Coast friends would say, Mark, your California is showing right now. But I think that uh, being in touch with that is actually one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader, right?
Right. Well, so it's interesting you ask this question, Mark, because part of, I'll go back to what you said. Mostly people don't understand what emotional intelligence means, right? Uh, a lot of the people who have not understood it and learned, and that's why I'm a huge proponent in today's organization that are transforming the way they are, right? We call it living in the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? The way we are transforming and the whole concept of put the human first has come forward, right? It always, every decade has its own what's the theme, and I
Mm,
call it,
mm,
with the pandemic, the social justice, put the human first has just reemerged. It's not that it wasn't there in the past, but it's just come in front of us in a different way. But when we talk about emotional intelligence at the top level, if the leaders have not gone through understanding what EQ means and what emotional intelligence means, and it's a brain science, how does your brain work, right? What is the difference between reacting versus responding? Reaction is your impulse. As soon as an information comes your way, you're reacting, and that's basically right.
right.
What is your DNA in regards to your past experiences, your upbringing, to that situation. If you're emotionally intelligent, you're going to process it. You're going to give time to process the information. You won't react, you will respond. And you're going to respond in a calculative manner so that the outcome you want is attained, rather than in your reaction, you may end up reacting in a manner that doesn't lead you to the outcome that's good for you and for others. So starting at the top is right. And I believe in today's world, I just read the State of the Heart report from 6 Seconds, the latest report. 6 Seconds is the organization where I got my EQ training, my understanding, my education, and also used that tool for my doctoral research. Their State of the Heart report is indicating how, after the pandemic, the emotional intelligence overall globally has gone so much down. We're full of stress. We are full of, there's burnout. And when all of these things happen to us as humans, it compromises our balance of thinking and feeling. And emotional intelligence is really about finding the balance. It's about finding the balance in your thinking and the feeling before you act. And it influences your behavior in the organization. It influences how will you collaborate with somebody you don't get along with, right? Your conflict management abilities. So there is a reaction. A lot of people don't like talking about emotional intelligence. A lot of people don't want to understand. And there are leaders who say, don't be emotional, be practical. And there's a lot of learning to be done, honestly. We need to take this concept forward and really leverage it for better workplace outcomes.
I'm a student of multi-generational learning and approaches and looking because we have 4 generations in the workforce right now. And for the first time in a long time, that's how that appears to be what it is. And I look at the communication challenges between the generations, and I'm curious. Gen X right now is kind of running the show. Boomers are in the boardroom. The millennials are the principal workforce, and I think they have a completely different set of values than Gen X. I think they're more akin to what boomers have, but I think they really care about these things like EQ, but they're not the ones leading. It's Gen X. And then you've got the Zoomers or Gen Z coming in right behind them, which are changing everything. I think there's I'm the question to you, because you're the expert, is do you believe that there's a generational change coming in leadership and management as a result of us, of the younger generations paying more attention to things like EQ? and heart-based leadership?
Well, it's an interesting observation and certainly a reality. I haven't looked at most recent research across generations. Certainly, the State of the Heart report I'm alluding to has brought forward the impact of the pandemic and all the things that are going on different generations. And the challenge from an emotional intelligence perspective and how people are feeling right now is pretty much it's more on the younger generations. And the report states that the baby boomers, right, and those who are really, really at the later stages of advanced stages of life have really are coming out better from they're the better in a different place coming out from the aftermaths of what we all went through, but the younger generations are mostly struggling. Now,
Yes, correct.
when it comes to emotional intelligence, again, you know, the need for educating the generations, whichever generation we are talking about, the need for educating them will not change. No generation is naturally emotionally intelligent, right?
Okay, fair.
Emotional
Yep.
intelligence certainly has been studied at different stages. It has been studied as a predisposition, that is a trait. Some people have more balanced way and others
Mm,
don't. And once you've assessed where you are on your EQ continuum, you really find what are their competencies. There are skill sets, right? And some
mm,
people are going to
mm,
be better in certain EQ competencies. Others are not going to be better in those competencies. And the goal of that education is basically to identify where are your gaps, right?
mm,
What's
mm,
not your
mm,
natural
mm,
strength? And you
mm.
need that to be to have successful outcomes in your personal relationships, in your professional relationships, right? And to get balance. So the goal of EQ is always finding that balance. You know, it will be interesting if you haven't read it to share that in the most recent pandemic, post-pandemic, and the social justice movements and everything, you know, that's going around you know, around the globe, there's a huge emphasis on empathy, right? My personal research found empathy to be the most correlated
Right,
EQ
right.
competency with everything I measured
Okay.
on the leaders and the staff engagement scale. But when you measure people on their emotional competencies, not everybody is naturally empathetic. Be empathetic, but you're not giving training in organizations on what does that mean. And if somebody is not naturally, from an EI perspective, it's not their natural competency, how will you help them develop that?
Thank you so much for helping us understand this huge topic.